Before we delve into X509 certificates, it's important to note that mutual TLS, or mTLS for short, with X509 certificates is used in OAuth 2 not just as a client authentication method, but also as an advanced security mechanism for securing access tokens. We'll explore this aspect in a later lesson. Now let's examine how client authentication works using an X509 certificate. Client authentication with an X509 certificate is more complex than other methods, but it provides one of the highest level of security for client authentication in OAuth 2. This method is based on mutual authentication. The client authenticates itself by presenting an X509 certificate, and the authorization server also presents an X509 certificate to authenticate itself. mTLS is a secure protocol that builds upon standard TLS, which was previously known as SSL. The concept is similar to server certificate authentication, but extends it to include the client, ensuring a secure exchange when obtaining an OAuth 2 access token. This approach requires a robust public key infrastructure (PKI) to manage certificates. Alternatively, self-signed certificates can be used for smaller or internal systems, but they lack the inherent trust provided by a PKI. I will not dive deeply into PKI as I want to keep the focus on OAuth 2. However, we do need to cover some essential concepts to better understand this approach. First, we are going to understand what an X509 certificate is, what a certificate authority is, and how the chain of trust and verification work. Let's start with the X509 certificate. An X509 certificate is a digital certificate that binds a public key to an entity, such as a server, client, or individual, and is used to verify identity and secure communication. These certificates are issued by a trusted certificate authority, CA for short, and are widely used for securing communications over the internet. They contain key pieces of information including the subject, issuer, validity period, public key, and signature, among other extensions. The subject identifies the entity, like a client or server that the certificate is issued to. The issuer refers to the certificate authority or CA that issued the certificate. The validity period specifies the time frame during which the certificate is valid and can be trusted. The public key is used for cryptographic operations such as verifying signatures. And lastly, the signature is a digital signature created by the certificate authority. This signature ensures the certificate's authenticity, confirming it was issued by a trusted certificate authority, and its integrity, meaning it hasn't been modified since its issuance. Just like server certificates used in TLS SSL to secure server communications, X509 certificates can also be used for server and client authentication, like mutual TLS in OAuth 2, email encryption and signing, code signing, and other secure communications. These certificates play a crucial role in mTLS, where both parties in a connection, client and server, verify each other's identity through their respective certificates, providing a high level of security during client authentication and OAuth 2 flows. We have mentioned that these certificates are signed by a trusted certificate authority. But what exactly is a certificate authority? A certificate authority is a trusted organization responsible for issuing, signing, and managing digital X509 certificates. This organization can be an external third party such as trusted certificates authorities like DigiCert, GlobalSign, and Let's Encrypt, or an internal certificate authority used within an organization that already has a public key infrastructure in place. The certificate authority operates by creating an X509 certificate for itself, with a key pair consisting of a private key and a public key. The private key is kept secure by the certificate authority, while the public key is included in the certificate. This initial certificate is self-signed and acts as the starting point in the trust hierarchy. It's known as the root certificate authority, root CA. Using the root CA, the certificate authority can issue, sign, and manage certificates for various purposes, such as client or server authentication. Now, when an entity needs to trust this certificate authority, it starts by generating its own X509 certificate locally. It creates a corresponding public and private key pair and keeps the private key secure. Remember, whenever you create X509 certificate, a new key pair is generated. The public key is always included in the certificate, but the private key must remain private and secure. Next, the entity sends a certificate signing request CSR to the certificate authority. This request includes the certificate and the public key but not the private key. The certificate authority then uses its private key to sign the certificate and establishing a trust. Once signed, the certificate authority returns the signed certificate to the entity, which can then use it for secure communications and authentication. Now that we understand what an X500 certificate is and the role of a certificate authority, let's look at how the chain of trust works. Imagine we have the trusted certificate authority and its self-signed root CA. Client A generates an X509 certificate with its own public and private key pair. It sends a certificate signing request to the root certificate authority for signing. The root CA signs client A's certificate with its private key, and this certificate becomes an intermediate certificate. Now, client B generates its own X509 certificate with its key pair, and sends a certificate signing request to client A, not directly to the root certificate authority. Client A signs client B's certificate with its private key, and this certificate is known as an end-user certificate. This setup forms a chain of X509 certificates rooted in the root CA. So how does the chain of trust actually work? Let's break it down. Bob trusts the root certificate authority because he recognizes and trusts the organization behind it. Because client A holds an X509 certificate signed by the root certificate authority, Bob also trusts the client A. Furthermore, since client B has a certificate signed by client A, Bob trusts client B as well. And this illustrates the chain of trust for X509 certificates. If Bob trusts the root certificate authority, he trusts every certificate in the chain. Now, in the context of OAuth 2, Bob represents the authorization server, which needs to trust a specific root certificate authority and verify the client's X509 certificates to issue an OAuth 2 access token. Don't worry, we will explore this in detail shortly. Before we move on, let's touch on how X509 certificate verification works, because this is crucial for understanding how the authorization server checks certificates. The root certificate authority can verify client A's certificate using its public key, because the client A's certificate was signed by the root certificate authority's private key. Similarly, client A can verify client B's certificate using its public key, because client B's certificate was signed by client A's private key. So for the verification of an X509 certificate, the authorization server only needs to store the root CA in its trusted store to verify incoming certificates. The client must send the entire certificate chain to the authorization server for successful verification.